Are you ready to unlock your full potential and achieve your personal, professional, and financial goals? Welcome to Remarkably Simple, the podcast dedicated to helping you do just that. I'm Moneke Fields, and I believe that with the right strategies, anyone can achieve remarkable results. Whether you're a seasoned leader or just starting a business, this podcast is your guide to achieving your goals with simplicity and efficiency. Let's embark on this journey together and make success simple. Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of Remarkably Simple. I'm Moneke Fields, and I'm very excited to introduce you all to Ms. Anne Corbin. She is a former accountant, teacher, an international speaker, and author of 3 books. She has taught children privately and in formal education. She has taught adults, and now she is teaching online. And thanks so much for joining me for this conversation today.
Moneke, it's my absolute pleasure, and thank you very much for inviting me.
Yes, so I would love for us to get started by just having you tell us a little bit about your background and what has prompted you to become the online teacher that you are today.
Well, my background is quite varied. I was very fortunate to grow up, do my schooling in Rhodesia, which was a rebellious colony, you might recall. And as a result, we had a particular propensity to be self-sufficient. We had to be because most of the world was against us. So Rhodesia as a country had to make all its own stuff and be reliant on what we could grow and what we could create for ourselves within the country. So I think it bred into everyone who grew up there that kind of a feeling and a responsibility and so forth. And it also bred into all of us a skepticism for what we heard on the news. Because whilst we trusted our own news, we were very well aware what the rest of the world was saying about us, which was just so untrue. I'll give you an example. There was a report in one of the newspapers in England of children, little black children, scrabbling in dustbins for food. And they hadn't really been scrabbling for food. They were chasing coins, which had been thrown in by the reporters to create this scene. And there were a few other examples like that. So as a result, I've always been rather skeptical of what I see in the news and on TV. And in the last 4 or 5 years, that has served me very, very well. And my brother has exactly the same feelings as myself. He lives completely elsewhere, but we're on this same wavelength. And I think that goes for a lot of people who had the upbringing that we had.
Yeah, so it sounds like, the experience that you had growing up is contributing to this belief that you're, being responsible when you learn and develop your own ideas, investigate things, and perhaps that's what leads you to be teaching other people about, concepts that are important to you and things that you think other people are improved to know.
Well, I think so. Yeah, my policy is question the narrative. Watch what everyone else is doing, think about it, and probably do something else.
Yeah, and then, check, what does it say? Trust but verify. I've heard that phrase a lot, that sometimes it's
Yeah.
just worthwhile for you not to take everything at face value. You can look into things yourself. It's very healthy.
That's right.
Develop
We're
your own
learning
ideas.
so much in the current climate about the lies that we've been told and even taught at school as regular subjects. And so much of it was a total waste of time. School trains compliance. And boy, was I compliant.
So it's funny because you strike a chord. As you know, I am a consummate educator and learner myself. It's actually how we met in a particular learning experience that we both engaged in. And I agree with you that there is a large element of formal education that really does train compliance. And I think it's also a beautiful blessing and opportunity when teachers like you or like myself have an opportunity to help our students find their own agency and activate the curiosity that they naturally have so that they are alert and, if nothing else, asking questions and seeking to understand what they're hearing and what they're being told, so that they can, sort of form their own knowledge, so to speak. So I think that's a very empowering perspective that you bring from your childhood and the
Thank
work
you.
that you do. Yeah. So I guess another thing that I'm curious about is now that you are teaching online, I would love to just hear a little bit about what it is that you teach and what your experience is with that now that you're not in the formal education sense.
I didn't spend very long in formal education because I really didn't like the rigidity that's
Mhm,
involved there. I gave up and became an accountant, which you mentioned. And then when I found myself training or tutoring children individually, so much better because you're just teaching without any interference from anybody else. But to answer your question about what I'm doing now, I'm quite fascinated by personal development and also by energy. And combining the two, bringing in a bit of psychology as well, you're approaching the next level of personal development. And I like to bring in consciousness as well, because that is a very fascinating subject. You see, the majority of people, I'm told it's possibly as high as 88%. They are living in this mode of survival. They're seeing this wonderful lifetime that we should be having as something that they have to get through. And they
mhm,
think every time something goes wrong, they look for something outside of themselves to blame, whether it's their parents or their family, their neighbors, the government, the weather, whatever. It's they're the victim and it's somebody else's fault or something else's
mhm,
fault. But then there's another level of consciousness, which is where most personal development takes its students, and that's to what would be known as the achiever level.
mhm,
So this is taking responsibility for yourself, but you could wear yourself out doing that because
mhm.
it's trying and doing it the whole time. So my aspiration is to spend more time in the third level, which is the effortless level, where life is genuinely happening for you. It's not
Mhm.
something that you're struggling against, and you can reach a place of recognition that everything that happens is really to bring about your growth. If you're challenged, well, there's a reason for that. And when you overcome said challenges, then it doesn't mean that everything's over and done with. It just means the challenges are going to get bigger and more exciting. So you have to get your mindset right.
Yeah,
Well,
I can
that's what
identify with that 100%. And I think that you speak to something that so many of us who are a part of a very focused culture can also relate to, that it's very easy to get caught up in the work that you're doing. And in my own experience, it's a sort of striving that is not anything like ease or flow. And when I say ease or flow, I'm not talking about easy. I think we expect to demonstrate discipline and have commitment and, engage hard work. But I
Mhm.
think the point that you're making about that achiever level is that very often it can be, the source of quite a lot of overwhelm. And people speak about burnout. I've experienced this myself because it is a little um, not as functional as this third level that you're talking about. So I would love it if you would just share a little bit of your experience about how you help individuals to perhaps transfer from the work that they're doing and getting to this place where the personal development really does happen and they're experiencing more of the ease in their either their life or their professional experience.
Monique, it's a huge subject. It's
Hmm.
difficult to know where to start. But if I start with where I was going with my energy training and the sort of the simpler courses which I used to train, and I have some recorded and they're available. There's far more to us than just this physical body. We
Hmm.
are surrounded by energy, and sometimes this is referred to as the losing my vocab for a minute, the subtle body. There are layers and layers which we can't see, but they surround us. And
Hmm.
it's in the shape of a torus, which you might be familiar with
Yes.
from electricity, studies of electricity. It's this kind of donut shaped
Hmm.
uh, field of energy which surrounds every one of us. And looking at a really huge character such as Jesus or
Hmm.
Krishna or the Buddha, they would be surrounded by an enormous field because their vibration is so high.
Yes.
Their presence can be felt as they just walk down a street in the village. Everyone in the village would be aware of it. I mean, I haven't come across that, but this is the contrast between a really big being and a very normal, average person.
Hmm.
And the lower your consciousness is, if you're in that survivor mode, you will be vibrating very, very low and not making an impression on anybody. And the
Hmm.
energy around you is actually very close. But as you raise your levels of consciousness and you raise your vibration level,
Hmm.
then the torus grows. And this is how we're all connected with one another.
Hmm.
Because you know how you walk into a room sometimes where you can feel a tension of some sort because
Hmm.
there's been a heated argument, whatever. Well, how do you feel that? You feel it through these waves, these
Hmm.
shells of energy, which overlap the layers belonging to the other people in there.
Yeah.
And when I first heard about this, it was because I'd got interested in studying energy medicine, because I had had a back injury
Hmm.
and it wouldn't heal. And the regular Western doctors were useless, worse than useless. They don't really understand pain. And their idea is a pill for every ill, as you
Oh,
know.
okay.
But these pills do not address pain, and I wasn't getting any better. And at one point, I was taking 4 different kinds of painkillers. And I wondered if this was my life in the future,
Hmm.
because, after a while, the painkillers don't even work because you get used to them and you
Yeah.
get addicted to them. And I'm very aware of that. I don't like taking medicine anyway, but when you're in intense pain, where do you go?
Right.
Say the medics can't help. I even had a few procedures done, not high flown operations. I would have been terrified if anyone had suggested that. But things like the thing they give to pregnant women.
The
Um,
epidurals, a
the
lot of
epidural,
people
yeah,
I
I
hear
had
are
one of
taking
those.
those. Yeah.
Mm. But it wore off after a few weeks, and then the specialist wanted to do it again. What sorted me out was I went to see a chiropractor who was also a healer. She
Hmm.
practiced energy medicine, and I saw her crossing over with her hands. And I for some reason, I was aware that she was working with energy, but I got talking to her and I never looked back. I started studying and a little bit here and there in my spare time. So I was still working full time back then,
Yeah.
but my interest developed over time. And I'm actually certified to teach some of this energy stuff.
Hmm.
But I'm addicted to learning. I keep coming across new trainings and new
Yeah.
approaches. And to me, this is yet another level.
Well,
So I am.
I think that what you just the story that you told about your own, experience with pain, and I think many people like me can think of several individuals that they, are close to or are aware of who have similar struggles to what you described and are using what I guess are considered therapies, but pain treatments that over time are less and less effective. and they too are perhaps afraid of more invasive treatments. But this brought to my mind the connection between energy and our everyday experience with, things like stress and sometimes difficulties with interactions that we have, that those things are often connected to energy as well. And similarly, raising one's consciousness and being aware of the level that you're operating in, as you talked about, survival mode, as opposed to this sort of third level of ease. And then when you mention the model of Jesus or these exceptional characters, even the ones that exist today, who it's difficult to be in their presence or even seeing them in recorded television and not be compelled by the energy that they carry. And I think that I love the example that you give, because when we use the word ease, I think that it automatically defaults to we're talking about, lazing around, but that's not what you think about when you think of these individuals who have had eons long impact in the world. We're
That's
talking about individuals who make a really big difference everywhere they go. But you point out such a great point in the difference in their energy, the way that they're carrying themselves. And it sort of brings to my mind that one of the things that these individuals have in common is such clarity of purpose and such dedication to that purpose. I think that is probably where the ease comes from. I wonder if you agree, this purpose, or what it is that they're doing every day. They're not running around like we would say here in the US, chickens with their heads cut off,
Oh
or
yeah,
as I
yeah,
used to
exactly
say
the
as a
same thing
school
in England.
leader, playing whack-a-mole, right? Like just trying to whack all the moles and never getting anywhere. This is a much simpler way to live. And I think is probably one of the bigger contributing factors to how an individual is able to create the energy that serves them well and then stay in that energy, as opposed to being, driven back and forth by whatever's going on the outside. Um,
I agree with you. And you mentioned purpose. I never even gave purpose any thought at all until maybe about 5, 6 years ago when I was on one of my personal development courses. I mean, one that I was attending as a student, rather than one I was giving. And there was an exercise that we went through about describing our purpose. And that was what brought home to me the fact that so many people like me had never even thought about it, because
mhm,
we do things automatically. As we leave school, we're kind of told, you need to pass the exams, you need to get a job or a career, whatever. And then it's expected that you get married and build a home and whatever. And that is so time consuming
mhm,
that you imagine it's your purpose. It's really only afterwards when my I I quit one of my long-term accountancy jobs when I decided that I had had enough of devoting my entire being to making money for somebody else. It's
mhm,
a joke. Somehow I saw the light, and that was when I started tutoring kids individually, which
mhm.
gave me some spare time and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And that's when I had the time to reflect and do some study on the energy side and the personal development side. And up comes this question of purpose. It's quite amazing how many people have never considered it. It's purpose that makes life worth living. That's
Mhm,
your reason for being. And okay, when you're a mom, when you're managing a family, the purpose is there, it's automatic. But what's your identity when the kids have left home? Maybe your relationship has changed. It does so often, marriages break down because people stayed together for the kids. Not that I'm saying that's a great idea, but it's what people
mhm,
do.
mhm,
And then sometimes the relationships break down long beforehand because, um, well, as I say, it's not a great reason to stay together.
mhm,
Or, of course, there's death. I mean, my husband died when I was very young because I married somebody who was older than me. So, in truth, it was once I had time to myself that I began to look inwards. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the key, because the answers aren't out there. They're in here. They're in your heart. So
I love this connection that you just made about one of the things that if we had the opportunity to shift it, that it would be really wonderful to make this kind of impact. That children attend 13 years of school here in the U.S. That's the target anyway. And out of all of those years, there's a lot of study of content and standards and things out of textbooks and now online. And very often, starting early, children are asked, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Um, but very little time is dedicated to helping children discover who they are. Who are they? What is that identity? What lights them up? What drives them? I think
mhm,
that these are the types of knowings that help individuals genuinely connect to a purpose that might be displayed in a type of career or work. And I think just getting it out of order in that way is what tends to have people like you and I in their adult years after they've, done a certain amount of time in the rat race or on the hamster wheel, so to speak, following along with just the traditional path that we're all encouraged to do, that we can find ourselves asking questions like we start to notice that certain things don't resonate with who we are. And we've done our own independent study to figure that out. And it's the time where we call it midlife crisis. We start to make choices that align more with how we identify and even making more intentional choices about not only who we want to be, but what contribution do we want to make to the world. So I love, the work that you've done as an adult with this and the teaching that you do to help people learn and discover these things. It definitely strikes a chord with me about ways that we could help our children get access to this, perhaps not as early as kindergarten, but not long after that, so that they have an opportunity to develop these ideas at the same time as they're doing their required study.
definitely. You know, the educational system, and this is not by accident, it's all done on purpose. But children are very much now, but for the last 100 years or so, they are taught what to think and they're not taught how to think. And there's a
Mhm.
very critical difference. And the idea of success that is bred into them at school is that if you just learn things off by heart and pass exams and then forget everything, you're successful. If you haven't got a good memory and you don't cope with exams very well, then you're considered thick. If you're developing a little bit slower than other people, again, you're assessed as thick. You are not encouraged to ask questions at school. It's not as bad, I suppose, in the last 50 years as it was pre,
Mhm.
say, 1950 or 60.
Right.
But certainly we were shut up at school if we um, asked questions because the teachers might get scared that a question would come up that they couldn't handle.
Mhm.
And I mean, education is just all wrong. And as you were saying, kids have to make decisions much too early. I was in the academic stream. I had to decide, aged about 14, whether I wanted to take the science route or the academic, sorry, the arty route.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, one of my favorite subjects happened to be Latin. So how do you
Mhm.
combine Latin with the sciences? It's,
Yeah.
it's not fair. I managed it with difficulty. My brother came across the same dilemma. He ended up teaching himself art, and he because he had to take, this was for A level, and he had to take 4 subjects, and
Mhm.
the timetables clashed. So
Right.
they made him take academic ones, and then he taught art to himself, and he did very well. He passed it. Um, but oh, I know something you said. Kids have to decide, or they're asked who they want to be, and yet that question doesn't expect an answer about being. It expects the answer about doing. In
Mhm.
other words, you want to do a fireman's job? Do you want to do a teacher's job?
Mhm,
Do you want
mhm.
to do an architect's job? I ended up being a teacher for a very short period of time because I didn't like it. I've suddenly recognized just after I'd qualified, I've never left school. And it's worse being on the staff end. Well, you'll know because you were a teacher.
Yeah.
It's worse being a teacher than it is being a student, I thought.
Mhm,
That's why I left and became an accountant. But I was pigeonholed into a particular direction. And it was only when I was grown up that I realized it was the wrong direction.
mhm. Yeah, so in my experience as an educator, I I I was surprised when I was working on my doctorate in education leadership, and one of my professors told me that I was an exception, not the rule, because I felt a sense of liberty in my experience, both as a student and a teacher. That somehow I had what I guess would be called audacity to ask questions, to think outside the box, to look for creative space, to explore, to discover. I was curious. And I carried that with me into my work as an educator. But I will say that I don't necessarily feel that all of my peers, the teachers around me, felt that they had the same liberty. I viewed the task that I was asked to do, teaching the state standards and delivering the curriculum, as a challenge because now I needed to find a way to bring harmony to my goal and purpose for being in the classroom, which was to teach my kids agency and help them awaken their own individual curiosity and find what got them excited to learn, not necessarily deliver the specific curriculum. And I found that successful successfully by using a facilitative strategy. So instead of telling my kids information, I made a stage of asking them questions and inviting them to discover so that there was at least more room for all of their individual expressions and creativity that improve their engagement. But I will say, being an educator for 24 years, it was exhausting to create that type of space because it was against the grain. And it got even more challenging. You talk about it's hard to be a student. It can be very challenging to be an educator, a teacher. I
Mm.
moved over into administration and found it even more constricting. And ultimately, it's the reason I stopped because there just was not, I wasn't able to find and working, overworking, and absolutely being in achiever mode. I was the queen achiever and wore a badge for it. It was invisible, but I wore it and I was proud
Oh, I like that
of
image.
the hard work, the very exhausting work that I was doing to um, try to accomplish what I thought was the right thing for my students when I was a teacher and for my students and staff when I was a principal. But it was, a challenge because I was not trained in the skills and the strategies, as we were talking about earlier in this conversation, to manage my own energy and to operate in a flow and ease. And ultimately, it took more energy than I felt I had to be able to serve in a way that really aligned with the identity and purpose that I felt inside of myself that was not
Mhm.
matching what was expected of me in my role. So, similar to what you decided, I had had so much independent experience with coaching individuals and tutoring children that, like you, I just figured I'd set myself free and help the people and work for the people with the people, not necessarily for and with the system. So I believe that there's a lot of liberty for all of the people that we touch and the ones that we see and everybody in the world when we are looking, as you said, inside for answers that we seek, as opposed to looking to find them in the ordinary structures that it makes sense that people sort of default to looking outside. But we're less likely to find whatever it is that we're searching for there, and that the liberty that we seek or the empowerment that we seek is generally speaking coming from within.
Yeah, you are just 100% right. The issue is that because people are pigeonholed from a very early age and the educational system is so wrong, what we've just been discussing is not going to come naturally. People need to be led down
Mhm.
this direction because it's a new direction and it's so different to what we learn at school. And the crazy thing is that when we're trained in whatever at school, because teacher said when we were about 6 or 7 or 8, we believe it and it sticks with us for the rest of our lives. For example, milk is good for you. Milk is not good for you.
Milk was
It's
never
anything
good for
but.
me. It was never good for me. It gave me what they called hay fever. I struggled with that all of childhood. I stopped drinking milk, problem went away.
All right.
No
Well, yeah,
more.
many people actually cannot digest milk,
Yes.
but I think 3/4 of the population can.
Hmm.
And one of our politicians, a certain Mrs. Thatcher, before she was the Prime Minister, she was the Education Minister, and she decided to stop free milk in the UK schools. Now, I didn't
Okay.
go to school in the UK, but she is famous because they used to call her Thatcher Milk Snatcher.
And it turns out that she did a service,
It
you
was
know,
actually the
that
right
was
thing to
very
do.
helpful.
Mm. Yeah.
There are a lot of places where the children are still regularly given cartons of milk, so we've still got work to do. You said this, very bold statement about the, school system being all wrong. And perhaps I would agree in this way by saying whether it's right or wrong, it's not enough. There's still much more that our children need and that we as individuals need in terms of our personal development. So that makes me curious about maybe a couple of highlights of things that you actually work with to teach people that help them find some of the expansion that I think we think we're growing up and we're going into this and we find we've still got work to do. So what are some of the things that you help people learn um, when you're leading these personal development courses?
Okay, well, one of the fascinating, simple procedures that people can learn is how to breathe and
Mhm,
how to gain strength from the universe simply through breathing. And then
mhm,
within our bodies, there are the 7 chakras, which I believe the majority of people grow up without knowing about. I think it's
mhm,
improving now, but certainly I only learned about them when I was well grown up, probably
mhm,
when I started. I was interested in energy, so I'm not sure if it was pre or post my back injury, because that was more than 20 years
mhm,
ago. But yeah, chakras, I discovered when I began talking about energy to people whom I wanted to train,
mhm,
they didn't know what chakras were. And I had by that stage begun to think they were really basic and that
mhm.
everybody knows that, quote unquote.
Exactly.
Well, everybody doesn't. And this is a mistake that a great many people make. Just because I know something doesn't mean that everybody else knows it.
Mhm,
So a lot of the basics of energy principles involve chakras, breathing, meditation, the value of meditation. Um, it's phenomenal. This is your connection to the divine. And the more you can meditate, the better you're able to go within and use your hidden powers, superpowers, whatever you want to call them.
mhm. Or access perhaps the wealth of wisdom. I think, you know, um, sometimes people are apprehensive about certain topics like what you discuss. I think,
I believe you're
even I see people demonstrate apprehension just about the practice of breathing, and we're all very often so guilty of having very shallow breaths.
oh,
And one
yes,
of the most
right.
interesting facts that
Mm,
I just recently learned about breathing is the large majority of the alveoli in the lungs, which are what bring the oxygen into the bloodstream
mhm.
and are necessary for the full functioning of this beautiful body that we've each been gifted with, that they're in the bottom of the lungs. And it
That's right.
takes regular practice
Mhm.
to be able to breathe at your full capacity so that it is natural to you. The
Our
purpose of the
children.
intentional practice, I understand,
Mhm.
is so that the habit is more natural. So I think it's great that you point out something like breathing exercise, but as you mentioned, meditation and perhaps understanding about your individual energy, that these are also things that are very helpful to be aware of in your
Mhm.
day-to-day life so that it's not I've seen people in a moment of panic not able to be able to calm themselves because they don't
Ah,
have the
well,
skills.
yes,
They don't
it's
have the skills.
connected because we have the fight or flight reflex,
Right.
and the more stressed we are, the more shallow the breaths that we take,
Mhm.
unless we think about it. But you may be aware that advice, oh, for forever has been when you're stressed, when you've lost your temper, when you're about to go into a job interview, all sorts of whens,
Mhm.
take 3 breaths, take 3 big breaths. They don't say take 3 deep breaths or take 3 breaths right down in your belly, flatten your diaphragm, um, close your mouth. When we breathe through our noses, automatically the air will go lower. If you do it properly, as your diaphragm flattens, you'll feel your tummy stick forward. That means you're doing it right. And it's also very calming for these
Mhm.
3 deep breaths to happen right down there in the lower lobes of your lungs, because yes, there's more blood down there. So more oxygen is absorbed from the alveoli, but also you've got the receptors from the parasympathetic nervous system down there,
Mhm.
where it calms you.
Mhm.
And many people go their whole lives sort of in this kind of very low level panic, and they're so accustomed to it that it feels normal, but they're
Mhm.
stressed the whole time, whether it's because they're always on bad terms with other people that they're living with, or they're in a work situation where they're stressed all the time. They're so accustomed to it that they think it's normal to feel that way.
Right. I think the value of practicing simple strategies like having access to deep, calming breath, and then the point that you just made about meditation, being able to separate yourself from all of the chaos, whether, it's busyness at work or things that are happening in the world, is really necessary for the well being of our body and our mind. You start talking about the parasympathetic system and the fact that individuals are operating not at calm and aren't even aware of it, right? That we don't know another way. And really, the only way to improve that is just like with anything else, it takes intentional practice and progress over time. Improvement in your breathing and bringing balance and calm to your parasympathetic system is not something that we can do in a snap for sure. I think
Just
these are great
habit.
strategies.
It's
Right.
habit. We can train ourselves to
Yes.
breathe properly without thinking about it, and the difference is phenomenal.
And this is not so much focused on, children in particular,
Mhm.
but I do have such a big heart for our kids, spending 24 years working with them and having that be my focus and dedication. And I'm also a mother, and I have seen what value it is to just take a couple moments every day. This is happening more often in schools, but I think there's still room for expansion of these ideas. Children learn better when they are taught to breathe. And children who experience anxiety can find a better level of functioning when they are taught to breathe. And I think that there has to be dedicated focus to that. The same is true for us as adults. So I think this is very powerful awareness and instruction um, that you give to people on this subject. And I wonder if people want to know more, about strategies that you teach and ways that they can improve their perhaps they are in this survival mode and they want to know how to get out of the being at the effect of everything's happening around them. Or maybe they are like we have previously been striving, like really good achievers have been trained to do. Um, and they're really curious about what it looks like to function with more ease while having a bigger impact. I think this is something that you could help individuals with. And I wonder where they'd find you.
Well, all you have to do is type Awaken.plus into any browser, and that will bring up my link tree.
I
And
love it.
you will find just about every link under the sun in there. You can link to my podcast, which is called Quantum Growth and Connection. You can book a discovery call with me. What else might you like to do? Investigate some of the coaching I do. Find me on Facebook, LinkedIn, all that stuff. I've got a YouTube channel. It's all on my link tree.
So, Anne, I have to just throw in this one shameless plug. Well, that's remarkably simple.
Oh, well done, Money.
Yeah, I just had to. It's the first time that's come out, but I love it. So, um what is the one thing that you would tell people who are listening and you believe that it would be applicable to everybody that they would do that would make some of the things that they're experiencing easier, less stressful? What is it that you think everyone needs to prioritize?
Well, just following on from what we've been discussing, breathe
Mhm.
properly. It
Yeah,
does make an enormous difference.
I think it does. I think your thinking, your action, reaction, everything is much better from this grounded and calm space that we create in ourselves when we do take proper breath. I wonder if you have a favorite story of transformation, either your own or one from somebody that you've worked with that you'd like to share with the audience for those who are curious about what's possible as a result of the things that you teach.
Okay, well, one of the practices that I know how to do is called parts integration. And you might be aware of a situation where you're telling a story and you say, well, one part of me wants to do this and the other part, well, that's what I'm
Hmm.
talking about, parts
Totally
integration.
been there before.
It's introducing the two halves of the argument that's going on within you. And there is a procedure, which I could take you through, which integrates those two parts and makes them communicate with one another. Now,
Hmm.
I saw this done on a friend who was studying with me in a particular training that I was a part of. And this was about 18 months ago. And this girl was large. I mean, really large. She
Hmm.
knew she let herself go and she felt fairly disgusted with herself and so forth. But as a result of that course, she made the commitment that she was going to lose weight. And she did.
Awesome.
I watched her lose, well, in English terms, it's 6 stone. So you've got to go 6 times 14 to find out how many pounds.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
it's almost the whole person. And she lost that over a period of 15 months. And she looks amazing. She's got her energy back. She's got her enthusiasm back. So that
And
was
she
just,
credits this entire transformation to the work that she did to integrate these two sides of herself that seem to be at odds.
that's
I
right.
love the beauty that we can experience and the liberty that we can experience when we just accept who and what we are, right?
Yes.
So I think that you raise a really great topic of interest that you haven't given us quite enough detail about what parts integration includes. So I think that people are going to have to follow on to know more. It has been an absolute delight discussing these things with you today, and I appreciate you so much for coming to join me on this show.
Well, as I said at the start, it's my absolute pleasure. I'm really grateful to you for asking me, and I have enjoyed our conversation enormously.
All
And
right.
I would just like to finish with something that I say to myself daily about grace and ease.
Yes.
It's a mantra, if you like. It's to remind myself of the ideal. So it's I am authentically joyful, abundant, and radiant as my life flows with grace and ease.
I do think I've heard you say parts of that before, and it is lovely. But for the sake of actually incorporating this phrase, give it to me one more time because I'm going to repeat it.
I am authentically joyful,
I'm
abundant, and
authentically
radiant.
joyful, abundantly radiant as my life
Life
flows with
flows with
grace
grace and
and
ease.
ease. Lovely. Thank you so much for everything you've offered to us today, and I look forward to seeing you again.
Indeed. I hope we do.